Hello and welcome to the Omnex webinar, Proposed Changes to 21 CFR 820. Today's presenter is Michael Checketts. Michael Checketts is an Omnex consultant with extensive senior management experience in medical device engineering, quality, and regulatory management. He is on the ISO TC 210 Quality Management for Medical Devices Committee that includes ISO 13485 and 14971. He is also a certified lead auditor for ISO 13485, ISO 14001, ISO 17025, and ISO 9001. During this webinar, if you have any questions for Michael, please enter them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them to the best of our ability at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and someone from Omnex will reach out to you with how to access the recording sometime after the webinar, maybe a week or so. All right, Michael, you can take it away.
All right, I think everybody can hear me. Welcome to our webinar on proposed changes to 21 CFR 820. This is a little...
Mike.
Yes.
We cannot see your screen. I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Okay, then hold on just a moment. Let's see, I'm trying to find the... Pardon me for just a minute. I'm having a hard time finding the share button.
Should be the green box on the control panel.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. There we go. Okay, how about now?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. This is a little different webinar than typically we handle because this webinar is being done before finalization of a standard. So keep in mind that although there are things are almost solid, everything in here is still subject to change. So everything we're talking about here could change. Hopefully we'll have a follow-up seminar or webinar after the changes are published to firm everything up and correct anything we're talking about now. So with that, let's move forward. The information on the bottom of this slide is the important thing. If you want to contact us at Omnex, you can do so with this email address and or the website address. There is contact information there. We'll spend a little bit of time on a brief introduction to Omnex and what we're doing. About us, we're we're a company that's specializes in consulting to the various sectors of the manufacturing organizations of the world. We've been around for 35 years and have 700 plus employees working in over 30 countries globally. Not going to spend a lot of time on the different sectors. However, know that we are a worldwide company. These offices we have throughout the world are identified in this slide. If you live or have a company or are working in countries outside of any of these areas, you can contact any of our offices or certainly our Ann Arbor, Michigan office, and we can direct you or provide help for you there. This is our 6 target markets. Of course, automotive, aerospace, semiconductor, electronic, autonomous vehicles, general manufacturing, and medical device. We cover services for gap analysis and diagnostic work, training and personnel certification, implementation and coaching, enterprise medical device software solutions, audits, inspections, and assessments. We also help you with product certifications as needed. Now we are not a certified body. We decided years ago that that was really not our forte because it ties your hands as a notified body. It ties your hands for consulting purposes. So we decided to shed that business and focus on the consulting. I know that Miles mentioned a few things, but just to let you know, I have over 40 years of medical experience, medical device experience. I entered the industry as a manufacturing engineer and soon after entered into the engineering management. I spent about 10 years with Abbott Medical, then 10 more years in the startup environment. The startups, the 2 startups I was involved with were acquired by major medical companies. You may have heard of Boston Sci or Medtronic. I then spent about 20 years with contract manufacturers as a first-tier supplier to medical device OEMs. Half of that was in engineering management. The other half was in quality assurance and regulatory affairs. This slide is a reiteration of the abstract for this webinar. I'm not going to read it all. We'll kind of touch on a few things later, but if you need a concise copy of it, that's basically what it is, or if you need to reference it further, it's the abstract. The FDA regulatory requirement 21 CFR 820 for medical device current manufacturing practice, CGMP for QSR's quality system regulations, is undergoing a significant revision at present. The purpose of this webinar is to familiarize medical device manufacturers who market or are intending to market in the US with the proposed upcoming changes. 21 CFR 820 has been around for a long time, since July 1978. It was put into law then. The first iterations were published in the 76, 77 timeframe. The FDA is now proposing to amend this regulation to align more closely with QMS requirements used by other global regulatory authorities, which translates into ISO 13485, which is currently at 2016 status, is the last time it was updated. ISO 13485 will, by reference, be incorporated into CFR 820. When finalized, the regulatory framework for the USA is expected to align with other global regulatory authorities. Now, incorporation by reference, we'll have a slide later in the presentation to address the pros and cons of this concept. But what it does is enables the FDA to harmonize without having to rewrite or necessarily change all the federal registers when the standard changes. And we'll spend a little more time on that later in the presentation. We'll open things up at the end of the slide presentation, as Miles mentioned. Use the open questions or the question box, the Q&A box, and throughout this seminar or webinar, type your questions up as you have them, as we go by it. Even if we're discussing and my questions or your questions are subsequently answered, it's good to have your questions down. We'll cover them and answer anything. I really want this to be kind of an exchange of questions and ideas, because as I mentioned earlier, we are not discussing a locked-in standard at this point. It is being it is subject to change. Let's see. Oh, also one other mention. This proposal is only for proposed changes in 820 of the quality system regulation. All other parts of the Federal Register are not affected by this proposal. So what we'll do is talk about the Federal Register 820 CGMP. We'll talk about new terms and definitions that are coming into play. We'll talk about key changes. Then we'll go into what's next, what can we expect over the next 30, 60, 90 days to a year. And then we'll go over whatever questions you have. The focus of this introduction is on the revisions, not an exhaustive treatment of all clauses. That would take probably a day and a half to go through everything. So we're just going to talk about the changes. And what you're going to find, there are not a lot of significant changes over how you're operating in business today. This is a high-level summary of the proposed rule differences. The first column is our current Part 820 from the subparts A down through subpart 0 or O, excuse me. The middle column is ISO 1345 requirements from clause 1 down through clause 8. And the proposed rule changes is on the right-hand side. You'll notice that everything is pretty much substantially similar to what we're working with today. There are four areas, four paragraphs in 820, though, that we're going to discuss those differences in a little bit of the detail. And they are paragraphs 35, 45, basically. I think that's about it. An introduction to 21 CFR 820. What's CFR? CFR is a Code of Federal Regulations, often called the Federal Register. So if I mention the Federal Register, that's what we're talking about, the Code of Federal Regulations. Title 21 is the title or the section of the Federal Register devoted entirely to food and drugs. Part 820 is the qualified system regulation for the medical device QMS, quality management system. However, Part 20 is now being called the QMSR, quality management system regulation, instead of QSR. This correlates with ISO 1345 as the QMS for manufacturers of medical devices. Note, quality in this case is a verb describing the management system, not a noun for the department responsible for the system. So if anything, an emphasis being taken off of quality system regulation and it's more focused on management of that system regulation. So keep that in mind, take that back to your various companies and make sure it's stressed that it's a management system, not a quality department system. This regulation then covers the QMS, or otherwise known as CGMP, current good manufacturing practice for medical device manufacturing. What 21 CFR 820 does not cover: many additional parts to CFR, to the Federal Register. Title 21 cover very specific medical device requirements beyond just the QMS. Some of these parts include Part 11, which has to do with electronic records, electronic signatures, that sort of thing. Part 801, medical device labeling. Part 803, MDR, medical device reporting. Part 807, establishment, registration, and device listings, and IDEs, for example, Part 812. So anything else to do with medical devices outside of the quality management system are someplace else in the Federal Register. A good updated listing for all these can be found at Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, ECFR. Now you type that into the web and or the FDA.gov, and you're going to end up with the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, and that is current day to day. So it's a very good location to have in your or on your web, on your desktop. I keep that present most all the time, at least readily available. New terms or definitions going into subpart A, general provisions and definitions. Blood and blood components is a new added subject, and it's in subpart F, or ID and traceability. It also has its own part within the Federal Register. That is not referenced, however. The HCT/P is also a new term. It's human cells, tissue-based products. That's covered under Part 1271 in the Federal Register. It might be noted that conflicts, if any, arise between 13485 and Part 20. The FDA regulations will control. In the US, at least, where you're trying to market or marketing your products, the federal regulations within 820 will override anything in 13485 if there are conflicts. That includes issues with foreign manufacturers for products coming into the United States. Any manufacturer may petition for an exemption or variance from any of these requirements. There are hard, fast rules, but face it, everything is negotiable at one level or another. So if you have any doubt or have any issues, the 520 subpart F has the form for petitioning exemptions. Definitions of 1345 are generally accepted. Those not appearing in 13485 follow. Component. There is not a component definition in 13485, which is all raw material, substance, piece, part, software, firmware, labeling, or assemblies that are intended to be included as part of the finished, packaged, and labeled device. Customer is not defined in 13485. That is persons, organizations, users that could or do receive a product or service that is intended for or required by the person or organization. A customer can be internal or external to the organization. Keep that in mind for inspections or audits, because internal customers are as important as external customers. Design validation. Establishing that device specifications conform with user needs and intended use. The difference between a design validation, a process validation, or design verification is intended use. Verification is to specs, validation is to intended use. Product and manufacturer, both of these are in 13485. But the rule or the definition for the US purposes is the definition we have here. Components, process agents, in-process devices, also finished and returned devices. Manufacturers are persons who design, manufacture, fabricate, assemble, or process finished device, and it includes but not limited to contract manufacturers working for you, and I'm not going to read all of that. New terms and definitions continued. We have the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It is referenced in here and is normative to CFR 820. And that can be found on the FDA.gov. Finished device, any device or accessory suitable for use or capable of functioning, whether or not it is packaged, labeled, or sterilized. So if you have accessories or ancillary components for a device coming in from the United States and it is not labeled such, it may be quarantined at customs, and you'll need to identify that properly. So finished devices includes ancillary or accessory devices or components. Nonconformity, the non-fulfillment of a specified requirement. Process agents are any materials, substances used to facilitate the manufacturing process. A constituent or a byproduct constituent produced during manufacture, which is present in or on the finished device as a residue or impurity, not by design or intent of the manufacturer. So it's not intended to be a product, part of the product, but it may be just a result of your processes. Like mold release is if it's used on any molded parts. Process validation is establishing that a process consistently meets its predetermined specs. Remanufacture is any process, condition, renovations, repackaging, restoration, or any other act to a finished device, significantly changing the finished device's performance, safety specs, or intended use. Rework. Action taken on a non-conforming product so that it will fulfill the specified requirements before it is released for distribution. Be careful with rework. If it is part of your normal production process to review and correct product or assemblies, don't call it rework. If you call it rework, it entails specific requirements that you're going to need to meet. Top management, senior employees with authority to establish or change the quality policy and quality management system. And that is the inner circle reporting to the president, including the president. Verification, confirmation that a specified requirement has been fulfilled. Okay, let's talk about the proposed changes within the 820. So paragraph 10, or subpart 10, a manufacturer must document a quality management system complying with the requirements of 13485. Manufacturer must comply with other applicable regulatory requirements in this title meaning Title 21, not necessarily 820. For example, Clause 758, which is identification, talks about having a document system to assign UDIs in accordance with Part 830. That's another part of the Title 21, and that is specifically for the UDI. Clause 7591, or the traceability, general traceability clause within 13485, the manufacturer must document procedures for traceability in accordance with Part 821. Part 821 is medical device tracking requirements. So you need to meet the requirements of that part of the Federal Register. Clause 823, 823 is reporting to regulatory authorities. So notifying the FDA of complaints that meet the reporting criteria of Part 803. Again, not a part of 820. You have to go to 803 to find out what those reporting requirements are. Clauses 723, 8.2.3 and 8.3.3, which is communications, actions relating to non-conforming product, etc., also have to be handled in accordance to Part 806, medical devices, reports of corrections and or removals. So you need to be aware of all the regulatory requirements of 13485 by knowing your Federal Register. Okay, subpart 10, 820.10, requirements of quality management system continued. Subparagraph C, manufacturers of Class 2, Class 3, and those Class 1 devices listed below must comply with requirements in the Design and Development Clause 7.3. So Class 1 devices could include or will include devices automated with computer software and the devices listed in the following table. And this table is right from the proposed changes. Catheters, gloves, restraints, protective restraints, system, applicators, radionuclide teletherapy, that sort of thing. Even though they're a Class 1, they need to meet the requirements of Clause 7.3, which is the Design and Development Clause within 13485. Subparagraph D, devices that support or sustain life. Any failure of which this device has to perform when properly used in accordance with the IFUs can reasonably be expected to result in a significant injury, must comply with requirements in traceability for implantable devices. Clause 7592, which is particular requirements for implanted medical devices, in addition to all other requirements. So keep this in mind, devices that support or sustain life. Subparagraph E, enforcement. Failure to comply to this enforcement renders a device adulterated under section 501H of the Federal Register. Such a device, as well as any person. Now, you notice that I've made that bold. A device, as well as any person responsible for the failure to comply, is subject to regulatory actions. Regulatory actions could be statutory and punitive to the device or the persons. And by the way, to remind everybody, once this is published, it becomes law, and it is it's not voluntary like 13485 is. Okay, 820.15, paragraph 15, clarification of concepts. Manufacturers subject to this part shall construe the following terms in 13485. The organization shall have the meaning of manufacturers as defined in this part. So you need to, anywhere it says organization, it means manufacturers. Safety and performance shall be construed as the meaning of safety and efficacy, or safety and effectiveness. The phrase safety and performance does not relieve a manufacturer from any obligation to implement controls or other measures providing reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. I might mention safety and efficacy is not mentioned in 13485. They use the term performance. Just because a device performs a function doesn't make it effective to all its indications. So make sure you understand that in the FDA speak, so to speak, that we're talking about safety and efficacy of a product, safety and effectiveness. Subparagraph C, validation of processes means process validation. I don't think that's rocket science to understand that. .820 paragraphs 20 through 30 are reserved. Right now they're being used, but they are covered by 13485, so that those paragraphs are now blank, reserved for future use. Paragraph 35, control of records. In addition to the requirements of clause 4.2.5, the signature for each individual who approved or reapproved a record and the date of such approval must be in place in the records. Records of complaints, in addition to clause 8.2.2, which is complaint handling, the manufacturer must record the following information at a minimum. For FDA reported complaints, reference part 803 of the Federal Register, they must be investigated, and other complaints investigated, or complaints investigated by a manufacturer and other complaints need to be investigated. So reference your part 803 of the Federal Register to make sure you understand what that means. But here's a list of 7 items that have to be recorded for all complaints: the device name, complaint date, UDI or other identification. UDI means Universal Device Identification. 4, the name, address, phone number of the complainant, nature and details of the complaint, corrective action taken, and any replies to the complainant. So this goes beyond clause 8.2.2 in 13485. Under paragraph 35 continued, part B, or subparagraph B, records of servicing activities, if you're servicing out in the field, and adhering to clause 7.5.4, which is servicing activities of 13485, you need to record the following information at a minimum for servicing activities. So very similar to the part A or subpart A. This you have the device name, UDI, date of service, name of the person who did the servicing, what was performed, and any testing and inspection data that is part of that service. Subparagraph C, UDI, unique device identifier. In addition to requirements of clauses 751, 758, and 759, which are basically your controlled production and service provision, identification and traceability, respectively. The UDI must be recorded for each medical device or batch of devices. Confidentiality, subparagraph D, records deemed confidential by the manufacturer may be marked to aid FDA in determining whether information may be disclosed under public information regulation in Part 20 of the Federal Register. This is particularly important when it comes to patient information during your clinical studies. Confidentiality, you need to make sure the FDA is aware of anything that is confidential so that they do not disclose it. Because of freedom of information, they disclose pretty much everything. So you need to let them know what's confidential versus what is not. Paragraph 40 under 820 is also held in reserve. That's no longer going to be part of the Part 820. Paragraph 45, device labeling and packaging controls. In addition to clause 751, which is control of records, the manufacturer must establish, maintain procedures providing a detailed description of activities to ensure integrity, inspection, storage, and operations for label and packaging. The manufacturer must ensure that the labeling and packaging has been examined or inspected for accuracy prior to release or storage, and needs to include, where applicable, and if it is always considered applicable unless you have it documented otherwise in writing. So you need to have the UDI or other identification, expiration dates, storage instructions, handling instructions, and additional processing instructions at a minimum. Subparagraph B, release of labeling for use must be documented according to clause 4.25, which is control of records. Again. Subparagraph C, the manufacturer must ensure labeling and packaging operations have been established and maintained to prevent errors, including but not limited to, then a litany of items. Inspection of the labeling, packaging immediately before use to ensure that all devices have correct labeling, packaging as specified in the medical device file. Results of label and inspection must be documented in accordance with clause 4.2.5. That, in a nutshell, is everything that's changing. If you're familiar, you've been in this industry for a while, that's not a lot of changes. As a matter of fact, within 1345 or within the current 820, I don't think there are any surprises. At least I did not see anything that was extraordinary. this whole thing is just to provide a level playing field for everybody in the business globally. So let's go back to the incorporation by reference, pros and cons. The pros of incorporation of ISO 13485 by reference enables the FDA to globally harmonize without having to rewrite or necessarily change the Federal Register whenever 13485 changes are made. The left-hand side of that, or the con of that, is if either standard changes, 13485 or FDA for some reason wants to make a change, it doesn't automatically change the other. So synchronizing the updates, review, and approval of either or both standards, there's not a vehicle to do that that will change both standards. So that's going to have to be worked out. And what that means, how that's going to be done, I haven't heard anything yet. Another pro for this incorporation by reference, quality science and US medical device standards will stay current with global regulatory expectations. So as 13485 changes, Part 820 of the Federal Register automatically changes. Like I say, unless there's a conflict of what those changes, how those changes are interpreted, which in the case of a conflict, of course, the FDA will, the Part 820 will rule. Another con for this incorporation by reference is that 21 CFR 820 is currently available free for use by anybody from FDA.gov, whereas 13485 is only available at a cost or in a web only, or in a web view only mode. So you can view it, but that's about it. You can't copy it because of the copyright laws. You need to buy it and you need to have it available. So that's another con for how this is being done. There may be areas in which things will change, but they haven't been worked out for as far as I know. So what's next? What happens now? The last major milestone was the completion of a 90-day public comment period, which concluded on 24 May of this last month. So we're not even a month into that yet. So these comments, there was a 3-month period where comments were accepted. Those comments are being viewed and evaluated by the FDA as we speak. The next step is we wait for the FDA to publish. Now they're either going to publish another proposal edition if there are significant changes. If there are not, then they will publish the new 820. As yet, there's no indication of when that will be. And it's going to be very contingent upon the feedback received and how troublesome it is within the FDA. Just for feedback, prior to 24 May, there was a meeting that was held, and there was a lot of discussion with the industry attendees. Here are a few of them. A deliberate rollout is preferred, with well-established dates and guidance documents, so that nothing is a surprise, nothing is catching any of the industry players by surprise or without being able to prepare for it. We do know that implementation will be at least a year from the published date. That's well established. However, Requests have been made to expand that implementation to even 2 or 3 years to allow a transition period, a longer transition period for industry to adapt to the new rulings. What's going to happen to QSIT or the quality system inspections? It's a guide. If you're familiar with it, it's a guide for inspectors or within the FDA and outside of the FDA, so that you can inspect your own company accordingly, and no surprises when the FDA comes on board and starts to investigate. What is going to happen to QSIT? How is that going to change? How is that going to be trained, etc.? We need a guide, a guidance document for risk management. As many of you are aware, ISO 13485 requires a risk management process within your company. ISO 14971 is a document that talks about risk management and how to implement a risk management process. I might also mention that there's a guidance document 14971, 24971 that helps as a guidance document for implementing risk management. So those unfamiliar with ISO 13485 might not be fully aware of all the risk management, but risk management, like it or not, is here to stay and is something that we all have to deal with. Last question, and I think this probably might be one of the most important. Will ISO 13485 certification be required as it is in the UK, Canada, or the European Union? Right now, it is no. The answer to that is no, it's not in the proposals. That could change. You don't need to be certified to a system to comply. For example, the FDA does not require you certification, your company, to be, quote, approved by the FDA. The FDA does not approve a company. You just need to comply to its rules. And I think that's all the FDA is requiring here, is that you conform or comply. It will need it. Right now, 13485 is a conformance or voluntary conformance to a standard. Once 13485 rules are incorporated into this CFR 820, it becomes a compliance. You'll need to comply in order to meet the requirements of the FDA. Doesn't require certification, but it requires compliance. I hope that helps clarify that. If there is any question about anything we've talked about, everything that I've talked about, the entire proposal can be found in fda.gov. This media/156940/download. So anybody can go into there and ruminate it at your leisure, and I would recommend you do that. It's a good thing to review. With the time we've got left, we've got about 10-15 minutes. I'm going to go through the questions. We've got some questions here within the participants. So are there any plans to update 13485 to the 10 clause HLS, which is the it's the paragraphs of the HLS from its current 8 clause structure. So it'll be more seamlessly audited along with other standards now written with the 10 clause HLS. I speculate yes, but are there plans to do that right? I don't know when that's going to be. the decision in 2019, the 2019-2020 timeframe to when the 1345 was reviewed for update, they decided not to make any updates. Now that review happens every 3 to 5 years. So that will be reviewed, and it is very much talked about that we need a 10 clause high level standard. I think that's for HLS. But yes, we do need the change. Everybody wants to change, but it's not speculated as to when that'll happen. I think that once this is adopted, 13485 is adopted by the FDA as they're proposing in Part 820, it will be much easier for the 10 paragraph or the 10 clause system to be accepted. But the jury's out on that. Speculation, I'm only speculating when I say that will happen. What does the acronym UDI stand for, and what is it? That's the unique device identifier. You go to the clause which I referenced earlier in the Code of Federal Regulations, or the federal standard. See if I can identify it. Yeah, Part 830 of the Federal Register explains unique device identifier. And that means any device sold within the United States and in Europe right now requires a UDI or an identifier that is unique and is registered with the FDA. Can you please expand the definition of design validation and verification and process validation, what they are? If we had an hour, I'd really love to get into it, but in a nutshell, it is as follows. Design verification is verification of the design according to the specifications and drawings that are written for that particular device. Does everything meet the tolerances, the dimensions and tolerancing? Do things fit together? Bench testing, that sort of thing. Design validation is, does the device meet its intended use? So you take the device, run it through the performance as it's intended to be used by patients. The clinical evaluations is part of the design validation for a medical device company. And that design validation is not done until your clinical results are in and finally approved. Process validation is validation of the process to meet the IQ, OQ, PQ standards, so it can be consistently met, will meet the exact same intended results as if you were verifying 100%, but you're not verifying 100% any dimensions, that sort of thing. You're validating to meet that verification. So I hope I explained that. If I did not, give me a follow-up question. Does Part 820 require connection or link for complaint handling and CAPA in any way? No, it doesn't. It when you say connection or link, that's computer language. Back in the old days when everything was paper, you just had to have files. So in actuality, a connection or a link, it just means that your complaint handling and corrective action, you show a trail, an audit trail from one to the other. And you can prove that the complaint resulted in corrective and preventive actions. Does it need to be a computerized connection or link? No. Does it have to be a physical link? No, but an audit trail, I guess, is the best way to describe that link. You do have to have an audit trail from one to the other. Can the changes to CFR 21820 identified in the slide deck be considered adds more so than changes? You know, I think the only adds were the some of the definitions that we talked about earlier in the early slides. I see it mostly as just changes to the system or to the to 820, to where it is it correlates best with 13485. I hope I answered that well enough. Packaging validation process and protocol in FDA. The packaging validations and processes, there are particular parts of the Federal Register that talk about the packaging validation, labeling, packaging. Let's see, I'm trying to look right now, see if I can, I've got a list here of most of the standards, the validations. I can't pinpoint it right now, but there are different parts within the Federal Register that talk about validation of your packaging. But the in a nutshell, I'll just tell you off the top of my head, the things that need to be validated in packaging, particularly packaging for terminal sterilization, are the materials used, the process used for sealing, the sterile barrier. The sterile barrier and the packaging is also in 13485. The standard reference in cleaning validation, there is a part within the Federal Register talks about the cleanliness and even sterility. There are ISO standards, particularly have to do with the sterility, sterilization, and cleaning for sterilization. Now, it might be well to know you don't have to clean anything. It just needs to be sterile and meet your particular requirements. So if you can do that without cleaning, all well and good. And if you want to give us a call, we can spend some time on all that cleaning requirements, the cleanliness in a clean room, the 13485 discussions and clauses as it comes, as it's written for cleanliness, the HVAC, that sort of thing, the infrastructure. Thanks, Lawson. One of our attendees said HLS, high level structure. Yes, that's the clause structure, 8 clauses versus 10 clause structure of ISO documents. Is software needed to validate before using UDI? Not that I'm aware of. The software, let me put it this way, the UDI requirements came about before software requirements did. So no, you can do that via paperwork documentation. That about, let's see, we got another couple of questions here. Do we need to certify it to 13485 to market within the US? The answer to that is no at present time. You don't need to certify it to ISO 1345 as we discuss. Will ISO 1345 become law? Not at present time. At least as we have it, indication that that's not been the indication yet. So there's still time for feedback to the FDA regarding the proposed changes. The official date was closed on May 24. However, if you want to contact the FDA directly, particularly their small manufacturers assistance group, you may have a leg up on that. Then how solid or firm are these proposed changes? How long is a piece of string? We'll get feedback from the FDA on that when we get feedback. I just can't answer that. Thank you very much for attending. We've exhausted our hour, and with any luck, we'll be able to move forward with the new publication of 21 CFR 820 in the near future, 3 to 6 months, I'm hoping. Thank you very much for your attendance. Bye-bye.